I could ask ChatGPT, what is wrong with this world? But I already know the answer. Humans are rapidly losing the ability to think. Good evening, Jerusalem Toastmasters and guests. An engineer, a physicist, and a mathematician are sitting in identical kitchens, and they have identical fires start on each of them on the kitchen stove. The engineer looks at the fire, calculates exactly how much water is needed based on the temperature and the amount of fuel and everything going on, fills a pot with water, adds some extra as a margin of safety, pours the water on the stove, the fire goes out, and he goes back to work. The physicist does even more precise calculations based on atomic weights and all kinds of different criteria and fills a pot with exactly the right amount of water. Why waste anything? Pours it on the fire goes out, and he goes back to work. The mathematician looks at the fire. He calculates from first principles, see XKCD 435. You don't know what I mean. The mathematician is going all the way back to the basics to figure out exactly how much water is needed to put out the fire, and then he goes back to work. The mathematician missed the most critical step, putting out the fire, because knowledge by itself is not all that useful. You have to take that knowledge and you have to think about how to apply it and then actually do the action. This is critical thinking. There are many types of critical thinking, but the idea is to take the information, all the information you have, and not just memorize the information, not just absorb the information, but actually think about what really matters and how can we use that information to make the right decision and make the right actions. There are some areas where thinking on the fly isn't actually the best course of action. For example, assembly line workers, they're doing the exact same thing every time. They're tightening the same bolt on one car and then the next car and the next car. They're doing the exact same thing, and they don't really have to think much unless something goes wrong. And in fact, those jobs are the ones that for decades have been replaced in many cases by robots and continue to be replaced every day because humans have the ability to think. Machines, in my opinion, don't think yet, and animals. So animals and machines, they're the things that we want to have to take the physical load and the repetitive tasks. But humans have this capacity to think. Sometimes, another example, soldiers, they're trained to repeatedly fire a gun and how to march and how to do many other things under the when they're trained over and over and over. So under the fog of war and incoming fire from the enemy, they can do exactly what they need to do without actually thinking, because there simply isn't time in those situations to think. But a lot of critical thinking goes on before they go out on the battlefield by the generals and everybody else trying to figure out what do we really need to do? How are we going to win this war? But there are many things we do every single day. We're planning, researching to various degrees, and thinking before making a decision are absolutely vital. The fate of the world may not depend on our decision, but it may affect your day or may affect your life. Simple example, shopping. 40 years ago, if you were looking for an item that was a little hard to find, perhaps a particular style of clothing, you might ask a friend for the name of a store that carries it, and then look in the yellow pages, remember those, to find out where the store is located. 20 years ago, you would have Googled it, finding the website of the store to go get the location of store hours. And now what do you do? ChatGPT, find me a place to buy such and such. And ChatGPT will give you information, but will give you the right information. Maybe, maybe not. And that's where your ability to think comes in. There's an important part missing in the above story. 40 years ago, if you were smart, you wouldn't just take your friend's word for it unless they were an expert in the clothing business, let's say. You would look in the yellow pages, and before going to the store, you'd call them up and you'd say, are you still at this location? What are your hours? Maybe even do you carry this particular type of clothing? 20 years ago, Google would have probably given you the website, but still, then you might, unless everything was really clear and definitely up to date, you would call the store or maybe email them to check the same information. But now, Google, enhanced by artificial intelligence, and ChatGPT and so many other tools talk to you in a friendly way as if they're that friend. They don't just give you the raw information or a pointer to the store. They say, oh, yes, this store has all kinds of wonderful things. I'm sure you'll love it. But do they really know what you really want? Do they really have the right information? Or are they just gathering things together, hoping that this will be useful for you? This is much like asking a friend who isn't really a friend. A good friend knows when to say, I don't know the answer to that question. A not so good friend, or maybe somebody who wants to be your friend, will often give you an answer even if they don't really know the answer, because they feel that that's better than saying nothing at all. But if they don't think, you need to think. A friend of mine told me that a few months ago she was shopping and she ended up asking Google and got an answer that it turns out wasn't quite the right answer. So she traveled a couple of hours to a store that didn't exist. Eventually, she got to the store's website and found out where they had moved to and was able to get what she wanted. But she wasted a lot of time and effort going there. Why? Because Google knows everything. ChatGPT knows everything. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And sometimes they just tell you what they think you want to know. Artificial intelligence, and I use that term loosely, is a wonderful tool. As search engines, computerized travel directions, like the ones that sometimes will send you into a very dangerous area because you just blindly follow through. You need to think. You need to gather the information. Doesn't mean researching everything. We can't read through hundreds of pages. Most of us can't read through hundreds of pages to find out what medicine to take, but we find a trusted doctor to give us the answer. Just like a mathematician trying to figure out a fire from first principles, raw knowledge by itself doesn't help. And how it's phrased nicely doesn't necessarily help. You need to really think and determine, is this really what I need to know, or do I need to find out more? The words of Ronald Reagan, trust, but verify. Back to you, Toastmaster of the Day.